Alrighty, we will, I guess, go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our May program of the Historic Foodways Society of the Delaware Valley. I am Dan Macy, the president, and I welcome all of our members. We also have members of AlFam with us, and Joseph and Towson group Facebook people are here as well. We have a record number of people have registered for this meeting, and that certainly shows how interested and how excited we are about our speaker today. Before we get started, I just have a couple little household items, and that is with upcoming programming. Because of obviously the pandemic, things are a bit more fluid this year, and some of the things that we planned are not going to happen. Because either sites are not opening up quite yet or they're restricted to certain ways. So the program that we had planned in New Jersey at Indian King's Tavern will not be happening now. And instead, we will be doing a virtual program on May 13th, Thursday, with author Adrian Miller. And it is called Black Smoke: African Americans and the United States of Barbecue. If anybody else is familiar with, he's a James Beard award-winning author. This is his new book. He wrote The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families. That's a fantastic book if anybody has not read that. So he will be our May speaker, again, May 13th, Thursday at 7. And I will send an invite shortly. And a registration for that. You can register already for that on our website if you go to historicfoodways.org. Anybody else here who is not a member of the Historic Foodways Society of the Delaware Valley, it is $20. We would love for you to be a member. When we have programs, live programs, they will be, members get a reduced price entrance fee, and all of the virtual programs are free to our members. The other programming change that we have right now is our first live, real in-person program will be June 19th now. And we are going to harvest lavender at the Warwick Furnace Farm, which is in upper Chester County, almost near Berks County. And at a beautiful lavender farm which is owned by Dolly Rosen, one of our members. She's also very involved with Victorian foodways issues. So we will go to her farm, harvest lavender, hear a little more about the history of culinary uses of lavender, enjoy a nice lunch featuring lavender. And that should be fantastic. So I will have more information about that soon. There will be obviously a fee for that. And again, it will be our first live program, and we will try to do our best to be as healthy and have it in the most healthy way that we can possibly have our in-live person meeting. Let me, if you're not muted, let me mute you. There you go. So those are our changes. We still are working on some of our programming for July. And so please stay tuned for that. Again, if you're not a member, please go to historicfoodways.org and please hit our membership page and please join us. So today we are very excited to have Clarissa Dillon as our speaker. Clarissa is one of the true luminaries of the historic foodways community, and we are very happy to have her. She has presented at numerous conferences, both our own conferences, a lot of other foodway conferences. She regularly works at the Thomas Massey House in Broomall, and as I've said on some of our other information, she has teamed with the Radnor Library, and they have filmed her, I think now 22 episodes of One Cool Colonial. and there couldn't be a more cooler colonial than Clarissa. And so they filmed her in the garden, and when it was been too cold to film in the garden, they filmed in the house, and a number of different cooking demonstrations, one of which we will watch at the end of her presentation today to whet your appetite. And so that's just so exciting that we get to see her sort of her escapades chronicalized for all of us on YouTube. She was so popular that Visit PA picked up some of the content and used her to encourage people to visit PA. So that's pretty exciting there. Clarissa has a doctorate of history from Bryn Mawr College, and she's been doing hands-on activities since 1973. She's a retired teacher with 31 years of experience, and she's a founding member of our organization. It's my pleasure to introduce Clarissa Dillon. Clarissa.
Hello. I'm sort of speechless after all those lovely things that you said about me. I've been having a very interesting time during the pandemic. In some respects, it's just been like winter when I was retired. I mean, I couldn't go out and garden because it was too cold, so I had things to amuse myself. And one of the things that I amused myself with was the program for tonight, which I entitled Thinking Outside the Book. And I have written it down like a real paper with footnotes because my computer will not allow me to add a bibliography after endnotes because endnotes say end. And so rather than fighting with the computer, I just do footnotes, and I can send Dan a copy of the paper through email and cyberspace. And then if you want a copy, he can send you a copy through email and cyberspace and so forth. And it will have the bibliography and all the footnotes and everything. So here is Thinking Outside the Book. A long time ago, Deb Peterson and I decided to write a book. The idea arose when Lance gave her a copy of Anne Cook and Friends, a book with a number of 18th century receipts. I remembered reading it at the Newberry Library in Chicago when doing research. At that time, I had no idea what the book was really about and had not used its contents until we began this project. Interestingly enough, Lance doesn't remember giving Deb the book. We felt that the problem with books of this kind is that the authors deal with ideas and scholarly concerns, but do not get down to using the receipts. Nobody was actually cooking. We are historic cooks using extensive research to recreate 18th century dishes and menus. From our activities, we consider the lives of 18th century people in greater depth. Anne Cook wrote a book she titled Professed Cookery. Maclean's short title catalog was our starting point. 3 editions were printed. All were done in Newcastle-on-Tyne for the author. There was also an additional 3rd edition printed in London and to be sold by the author. The publishing record is short, and originals are rare today. Repositories for various editions are in Britain and the United States. The first edition, 1754, Newcastle, no repository listed. Second edition, 1755, Newcastle, Edinburgh University Library, Newcastle-on-Tyne Public Library, Library of Congress, Kansas University Library. Third edition, 1760, Newcastle, Newcastle-on-Tyne Public Library. Third edition, 1760, London, Glasgow University Library, Wellcome Library in London, Kansas University Library, and Colonial Williamsburg. Williamsburg was a possible visit We had used their library at least once before, but they were just owners of the book. Newcastle not only had the book, but it was also where it had been published. So we decided to start by contacting the library there. I wrote, and the library replied, and oh wow, they owned a copy of the first edition, possibly the only one in existence. So rare, it wasn't listed in Maclean. A trip to England was indicated. In the summer of 2016, I went to London. A Brit Rail pass made it easy to travel to Newcastle on time, where I had an appointment at the library. On a previous visit to that city, I had been depressed by the really dreadful state of things. Shipyards idle, most inhabitants evidently on public assistance, and a general atmosphere of poverty, pessimism, and gloom. This time, I was very pleasantly surprised by how much the city had changed. Because enormous sums had been invested to turn things around, Newcastle had become a colorful, bustling city with lots of traffic, plenty of shops, and prosperous-looking pedestrians. At the library, I was given a desk, a chair, copies of the first and second editions of Professed Cookery, and left to investigate without supervision or concern. And this is why I got the PhD. So libraries would allow me in to handle these things and let me just sit there and do research. I loved it. Back in the USA, we began our leisurely activities. There are several secondary sources about Anne Cook and her acid criticisms of Hannah Glass in her cookbook, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy. No one seems to be quite sure why Cook was so angry, but she certainly was. She went through Glass's book receipt after receipt, complaining about all sorts of things. We decided that it was less important to think about why Cook was so negative and more to find out if her criticisms were valid. So, after having determined that Cook had been working out of the second edition of The Art of Cookery, we got a scanned copy from the Library of Congress. We then began planning our experiments. We arranged to roast a large piece of beef on the spit at Pottsgrove Manor and cooked on the hearth at the 1696 Thomas Massey House. We prepared dishes in our modern kitchens when a hearth wasn't really necessary. Our experiments have been discussed in our reprint of the first edition. In her second edition, Cook had added an index, a very strange index, and included a plan of housekeeping, which is filled with autobiographical material, but has almost nothing of use in our project. Today, there are reprints of the third edition available from Barnes & Noble and Amazon, but there's nothing in their ads about actually using the book as a manual. Our approach to Anne Cook's book provided me with an idea for other historic cooks. Think outside the book. Cookbooks of any kind provide guidelines for preparing food and may give menus as well. Users may follow or adapt the receipts as they choose. Historic cooks are constrained by time, place, and culture if they are trying to include foodways in their presentations of past life. Period cookbooks do not tell us who cooked what receipts. Were the ingredients available? There is much material not included, so think outside the book. There are other sources besides printed and manuscript household books that can tell us about 18th century foodways. A lot of words must be read to find a few devoted to food. Receipts and menus are few and far between, but they are there and are of inestimable value to us. The rest of today's presentation will deal with such other sources. Not all the ingredients required in a dish were available to the 18th century housewife in the world of William Penn. There are sources we can use today to find some of them. Account books which I used to avoid, tell us what was bought and sold. Ingredients from exotic places were imported, and account books verified their sale. Newspaper advertisements from Philadelphia merchants listed spices, wines, and unusual items like mango pickles, so we know they were available to those with the money to buy them. Farmers' records may mention such local ingredients as beans, potatoes, turnips, and other such produce. Local garden books are rare, but if found, can note other crops such as cauliflower, lettuce, and sorrel. Checking records like these is a good place to start when planning to recreate an 18th century meal. Books on agriculture and farming practices would not seem likely sources, but you never know. J.B. Bordley's book, Essays and Notes on Husbandry and Rural Affairs, has lots of very valuable material. There are receipts for such staples as beer and bread that can be used today, as well as a number of receipts for feeding large numbers of hard-working men like soldiers and harvest crews. These receipts are useful when talking about the lower sort. The dishes are filling and palatable, but can become monotonous if served daily. Here is just one example. Barley broth, kalkun. It admits of a mixture of almost every kind of garden vegetables and is never out of season. Onions or leeks and parsley are always a part of the ingredients, besides which cabbage or greens, turnips, carrots, and peas may be added. A teacup of barley suffices for a large family. Pearl barley is dearer, yet not so good as the common husked or Scotch dressed barley. Water, 4 quarts, beef, 4 pounds with bones, barley, 4 ounces. Count Rumford says barley meal is better than whole barley for thickening broth and making it more nourishing. Stew all together 2 hours, then add the herbs cut small and salt. The whole then boils till tender. Skim off the fat or not as you like it. Onions or leeks must not be omitted. Another receipt concluded with the following comment. These dishes are not meant to be continual, but to be 3 or 4 days in the week. When I have cooked these various dishes, the first time, oh, they're great. Second day, not so good. Third day, you want to throw it against the wall. So this is why there is this comment about not serving it every day. Another Mid-Atlantic farmer's record included the following. As a good farmer may afford to keep a good house, and some may keep a genteel one, it may not be improper to give a few good and experienced receipts, as most of the materials are the produce of a farm. In this book, the editor said that he did omit a number of receipts because major portions of them were missing, so they were unusable. Many period cookbooks have a section with menus. These are often for more elaborate meals than an ordinary farm or tradesman's wife would have provided. Therefore, it is not wise to plan a meal based on one of these menus unless there is corroboration from other sources. We might, however, use the menus for those lavish dinners provided to the delegates to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia in 1774, because John Adams described them in his diaries, and he really sounds a little upset. At Powell's on the 8th of September, most sinful feast again, everything which could delight the eyes or allure the taste, curds and creams, jellies, sweetmeats of various sorts, 20 sorts of tarts, fools, trifles, floating islands, whipped syllabubs, etc., etc., Parmesan cheese, punch, wine, porter, beer, etc., etc. At Miles Fisher's, the 17th of September, the most costly entertainment, ducks, hams, chickens, beef, pig, tarts, creams, custards, jellies, fools, trifles, floating islands, beer, porter, punch, wine, and a long, etc. At Benjamin Chew's on the 20th of September, turtle and every other thing, flummery, jellies, sweetmeats of 20 sorts, trifles, whipped syllabubs, floating islands, fools, etc., and then a dessert of fruits, raisins, almonds, pears, peaches, wines most excellent and admirable. So diaries are another useful source for us. There are similar menus for special occasions in other diaries. Hannah Callender Sansom included the menu for a wedding dinner for 43 in her diary. The bill of fare: 2 rumps of beef, 2 gammons, 2 quarters of lamb, 2 calves' heads, pigeons, ducks, 2 legs of veal, breast of veal, 2 tongue, breast of mutton, pair of calves' feet, coconut, almond, orange pudding, apple, cranberry, gooseberry tart, with some few decorations of cookery. Anne Warder is another incredibly useful source. In her diary, she mentioned a family dinner featuring turtle for 24, prepared by a hired cook. An elegant entertainment it was, having 3 tureens of soup, the 2 shells of turtle baked, besides several dishes of stew with boned turkey, roast ducks, veal, and beef. After these were removed, the table was filled with 2 kinds of jellies and various kinds of puddings, pies, and preserves, and then almonds, raisins, nuts, apples, and oranges. Elsewhere, she also described foods: coleslaw. This is a new dish to me, but frequent among the Germans. It is a hard cabbage cut very fine with pepper and vinegar poured over it. She has also given us information about corn, a fine dish of Indian corn, which is here very common, boiled and bitten off the stalk when young with rubbing a piece of butter on it. So they did have corn on the cob, even though sometimes interpreters tell us they didn't. The receipt for another corn dish was printed in an almanac, a receipt for making sweet corn and succotash. Take the ears of Indian corn, what is in the milk, and boil them almost enough to eat. Then shell it and spread it on a cloth very thin, and dry it in the sun till it shrinks to half its bigness and becomes very hard. Then put it into any dry cask, and it will keep the year round. When you use it, you must put it into a pot and let it warm moderately over a fire for 3 or 4 hours, by which means it swells considerably. Then boiling it till you find 'tis fit to eat. In order to make succotash, 'tis only putting about a 1/3 part of beans with the corn when you boil it. There were few receipts in almanacs, but again, you never know. Sometimes it is possible to connect a diary reference with a receipt. On the 29th of December, 1759, Hannah Callender Sansom's entry included, "Made a large parcel of doughnuts." No receipt was provided, but in a local manuscript collection, there is this: doughnuts, 4 pounds of flour, 1 1/2 sugar, 1/2 butter, 1 teacup of yeast, 1 quart of milk, and whatever spice you please. H. Collins. No directions for cooking were provided. Another possible source for Foodways information is correspondence. My most exciting experience involved rhubarb, usually an 18th century medicinal. Using the root only, Elizabeth Drinker made and used spiced rhubarb as a purge. In a letter to John Bartram, Peter Collinson provided an unusual receipt using rhubarb as a food. Rhubarb makes excellent tarts before most other fruits fit for that purpose are ripe. All you have to do is take the stalks from the roots and from the leaves, peel off the rind and cut them in 2 or 3 pieces, and put them in crust with sugar and a little cinnamon. Then bake the pie or tarts. Eat best cold. It is much admired here in England and has none of the effects that the roots have. It eats most like gooseberry pie. Don't you love that? It has none of the effects of the roots, which were a purge. So guests didn't have to worry about running to the necessary after dinner. I prepared this tart in John Bartram's kitchen using rhubarb from Anne Bartram's recreated kitchen garden, perhaps the most historical cooking I'll ever do. The pie is excellent. Some years later, I found the following receipt in a book advertised for sale in the 19th of November 1783 Pennsylvania Gazette. To make rhubarb tarts, take stalks of English rhubarb that grow in the gardens, peel and cut it to the size of gooseberries, sweeten it and make them as you do gooseberry tarts. These tarts may be thought very odd, but they are very fine ones and have a pretty flavor. The receipt was copied by Richard Briggs, whose cookbook was republished in Philadelphia at the end of the 18th century. He just borrowed Hannah Glass's receipt. It took about 100 years for rhubarb stalks to become the common early spring pie ingredient we know today, and it wasn't combined with strawberries. Rhubarb is available in April, but strawberries aren't ripe until June. May comes in between, and colonists had no way of preserving rhubarb. Just because your grandmother made strawberry rhubarb pie doesn't mean colonists did. And I encourage people on sites only to make rhubarb tarts if they have site-specific reference to using rhubarb stalks in food. Travel accounts may be useful. Dinner was served in the American, or if you will, in the English fashion, consisting of 2 courses, one including the entrees, roast and warm side dishes, the other the sweet pastries and preserves. When the second course is removed, the cloth is taken off and apples, walnuts, and chestnuts are served. It is then healths are drunk. The coffee, which comes afterwards, serves as a signal to rise from the table. This thing about after the second course is removed, what comes next is the dessert. It's fruit and nuts, dried, preserved, fresh. It's not the sweet puddings and the syllabubs. Those are part of the second course, and you have to be very firm with visitors who want to call the pudding the dessert when you have it on the table next to the beef collops. We are fortunate to have accounts by 2 Swedish travelers. They provided information about colonists other than British. For Swedish settlers in Delaware and Pennsylvania, a visitor recorded ham, beef, tongue, roast beef, fowls with cabbage set round about make 1 meal. Roast mutton or veal with potatoes, turnips form another. Another still is formed by a pasty of chickens or partridges or lamb. Beefsteak, veal cutlets, mutton chops, or turkey, goose, or fowls with potatoes set round, with stewed green peas or Turkish beans or some other beans are another meal. Pies of apple, peaches, cherries, or cranberries, etc., form another course. When cheese and butter are added, one has an ordinary meal. For noon in summer, soup, fresh meat, dried beef, and bacon with cabbage, apples, and potatoes, Turkish beans, large beans, all kinds of roots, mashed turnips, pumpkins, cashews, and squashes. 1 or more of these are distributed around the dish. Also boiled or baked pudding, dumplings, bacon and eggs, pies of apples, cherries, peaches, etc. In winter, hominy soup is cooked with salt beef and bacon. Then also pasties of lamb or chicken are used and can keep cold a whole week. Also pancakes of wheat flour or of buckwheat. Another traveler wrote about the Dutch in New York. Their dinner is buttermilk and bread, to which they sometimes add sugar. then it is a delicious dish for them, or fresh milk and bread, or boiled or roasted flesh. They sometimes make use of buttermilk instead of fresh milk to boil a thin kind of porridge with, which tastes very sour, but not disagreeable in hot weather. To each dinner, they have a great salad prepared with abundance of vinegar and very little or no oil. At dinner, they sometimes eat cheese. It is not in slices, but scraped or rasped so as to resemble coarse flour. They commonly drink very small beer or pure water. Cooks, read widely. You never know when something useful will turn up. A while ago, Rich Paul said he thought I would enjoy The Unfortunate, an indentured servant's memoir. It is indeed delightful, and to my surprise, the source of a much wanted receipt for cornmeal mush. There are references to this dish in various local sources like Ann Warder's diary and the menu for prisoners in the Philadelphia jail. Since it's the kind of dish for which a receipt isn't really necessary, directions in the 18th century were probably passed on orally. I didn't want to use New England sources, and I didn't expect to find local instructions. However, William Morale gave me directions. With this corn, they make a kind of hasty pudding, boiling it in salt and water till it is thick. Then pour it into a dish and serve it up with milk, sometimes with butter, but most commonly with treacle. It is a hungry food and is called mush. They make use of it for puddings, both boiled and baked, which with eggs is as good as a rice pudding. Raisins and currants are seldom used by reason of their dearness, being 12 pence a pound. Morale also provided a useful item. Larks are not here to be found. So what about this? Found in a handwritten manuscript in Stenton in Germantown. For sauce for lark, take grated bread and fry it in browned butter with a little pepper and salt. Let it be crisp and serve in a cup. No provenance for this collection has been found to date, but it contains English receipts, all written by the same person, except for 2 receipts added at the end. The collection may have been made for or by a bride. A useful comparison can be made with Polly Burling's A Book of Receipts, April 1770, which was put out by Sue Huskin and Mercy Ingraham. The historic cook has a choice when thinking about that sauce receipt. Either don't, or use it for another small bird. Perhaps the most unusual and unexpected source of 18th century receipts is poetry. Here are 2 examples, and they can actually be used. Take a knuckle of veal, you may buy it or steal. In a few pieces cut it, in a stewing pan put it. Salt, pepper, and mace must season this knuckle. Then what is joined to a place with other herbs muckle. That which killed King Will and what never stands still, some sprigs from that bed where children are bred, which will mend it both spinach and endive and lettuce and beet with marigold meat. Put not water at all, for it maketh things small, which lest it could happen, a close cover clap on. Put this pot of wood metal in a boiling hot kettle, and there let it be. Mark the doctrine I teach, above let me see, thrice as long as you preach, so skimming the fat off, say grace with your hat off. Oh, then with what rapture will it fill dean and chapter? That's John Gay, 1685 to 1782. And a receipt for salad dressing. 2 boiled potatoes strained through a kitchen sieve, softness and smoothness to the salad give. Of mordant mustard take a single spoon, distrust the condiment that bites too soon. Yet deem it not, though man of taste, a fault, to add as much as a double quantity of salt. 4 times the spoon with oil of Lucca crown, and twice with vinegar, procured from the town. True taste requires it, and your poet begs the pounded yellow of 2 well-boiled eggs. Let onions' atoms lurk within the bowl, and scarce suspected animate the whole. And lastly, in the flavored compound toss a magic spoonful of anchovy sauce. O great and glorious, O herbaceous meat, 'twould tempt the dying anchorite to eat. Back to the world he'd turn his weary soul and plunge his fingers in the salad bowl. Sir Sidney Smith, 1771 to 1845. I found this receipt in a book called Early American Cookery, which I horrified the gift shop staff by saying, "Oh, this might be another awful book." And they looked at me and I said, "I can tell it's an awful book if it contains the words quaint and dainty." And I found both words on the same page, so I bought the book. It's got a great idea. It takes famous people like William Penn and George Washington and other people and gives recipes for each person. It doesn't say where they get the recipes. And they do a lot of peculiar things. And I was reading along. I always read a cookbook when I've bought it, like a novel. And then I go back and deal with it. And I recognized that onions' atoms lurk within the bowl and scarce suspended animate the whole. I mean, that just, I remembered. And that is a true 18th century cadence. And it was supposed to be, the poem was supposed to have been George Gatling of the machine gun, his mother's recording of her recipe for salad dressing. And can you see this mid-19th century lady sitting in the middle of the Midwest prairies, writing 18th century poetry in her recipe book? And the answer is no. So I thought long and hard, and then I wrote to the publisher, who's somewhere in Maryland, and I gave him more information about Sidney Smith than he could ever need. But I really wanted him to change the book and give Smith credit for this poem. And the first person I checked was John Evelyn, and he wasn't the author. And then I checked Sidney Smith, who wrote a lot of very funny things. And I didn't expect to hear, but the publisher wrote back. And he spent a great deal of time and a lot of gas hunting through all of Maryland, looking for copies of Sidney Smith's works. And then he finally found them. So he was checking up to make sure I was right. And then he wrote and said, yes, indeed, I was right. And he'd become a fan of Sidney Smith. He didn't say whether he changed the book. So we don't know about that. But I really felt pleased that he answered, because usually these letters go to the round file. To conclude, historic cooking just for fun can use receipts from all around the world. However, if you are demonstrating on a site or investigating the lives of people living in a particular place at a particular time, you have to be very selective when you choose your menu and receipts. Lots of facsimile reprints and scanned copies of period cookbooks are now available, but their contents may not always be suitable. The historic cook should consider a variety of sources like those I have considered today. Not everyone can do the kind of in-depth research required, but when the research is available, it should be utilized. It is my hope that the ideas presented today will be helpful to colonial cooks in the world of William Penn. Of course, we all start with cookbooks, but don't stop there. Think outside the book. Now, for those people who have questions about the book that Deb and I have worked on, it has not been published yet. We are talking with a publisher in Havertown, and the people there have done reenactments, and so they know where we're coming from. And there are a couple of other possibilities. We do have a title for the book. It is entitled A Cook's Perspective. and something that people may not notice, but we think is very funny. There's a period after the word a. So if people have questions, I can try.
Yes, please. If anybody has any questions, we'd love to hear it. I would like to play an episode of One Cool Colonial, and in it, it references Elizabeth Drinker, which you did talk a little bit. You mentioned in your talk. Can you tell some of our people who are not familiar with her a little bit about her? And in fact, she's also someone that you've found outside of a cookbook.
Oh, Elizabeth Drinker is an absolutely splendid source. Her diary was kept for almost 50 years. The reason she had the time to keep the diary was she didn't do the housework. Her sister was the housekeeper. Elizabeth Drinker's diary began before she married, and then she married a widower who already had one son. And she and Henry Drinker were married for many, many years. They had 6 children, 3 of whom died. Her diary contains all sorts of marvelous things. She was curious and interested in all sorts of things. She was literate. Her husband had the money to buy things, so he bought her a copy of John Parkinson's massive herbal, and she talks about it in her diary and how much she enjoyed it. She talks about the ordinary life of people. She tells what her friends are up to. She copies articles out of the newspaper. She provides little tidbits of ordinary life that otherwise you might not find. She does occasionally talk about meals. I dined by myself on cold leg of lamb, bacon, eggs, and beans for my July meal in So Serve It Up, which is a meal a month for a year. And I explored what she meant when she said bacon, eggs, and beans, and provided receipts. She gives information that you would not expect to find, and although it has a splendid index, it doesn't have everything, and so I keep adding things that are of interest to me. She talks about diapers. She talks about making medicines for the family. She indicates in one case when the doctor prescribes one thing for her sick daughter, she changes the prescription herself, which shows she feels she's just as qualified as he is, which is an interesting attitude. The original diary is in Philadelphia in the Historical Society. For a long time, you could only work from the typescript because the diaries were fragile. And there was a book published, extracts from the diary, made by a descendant who left out all the best bits, like worming children and diapers and all that stuff. And of course, that was what I wanted to read about. And in 1991, the complete 3-volume reprint of the diary, with an excellent biographical index as well as an ordinary index, was published. It's thin pages, small print, densely printed. It's not an easy read, but oh, it's so valuable. And if you haven't used it, I would suggest you consider it. The author did make a 1-volume paperback, and I have that, but I've never bothered to read it because I have the 3-volume one, and that's the one I use, and I use it all the time.
I think you can buy reprints of it. Is that correct? I think I saw you can buy reprints.
Yes, it's so valuable, and there's so many demands for it. It would not surprise me at all. It wasn't cheap when I bought it, and it's probably even less cheap now.
So the reason why I ask is because with this episode of One Cool Colonial has Clarissa demonstrating some recipes from her diary. Elizabeth Drinker's Diary. And I wanted to thank Pam Sedor. And as if anybody is on here, you can see Clarissa's name is not under her picture, but in fact, Pam Sedor's name is under there. That's because Clarissa was at Pam's house. And
Yes.
Pam is the reference librarian at the Radnor Memorial Library and has been so kind as to help us with our technology.
She should
And not
come
only
in
that,
here now.
yes,
She's
if you want to
lurking
see
in the
Pam,
kitchen.
she has put all of these videos together. And if anybody's interested, go to One Cool Colonial. We'll look at episode 20. And Pam.
Hi, Dan.
Hi,
everybody.
Pam. Thank
Hello.
you again.
Thank you.
You want to really just maybe quickly talk about how One Cool Colonial came about?
Thank you all, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm so excited for Clarissa tonight. I really am. Another gig, see? Pandemic doesn't stop, Clarissa. We're neighbors. And when everything shut down, the library closed down, and I was told to work from home, and I do events at Radnor Library. And like all of us, we've had to reinvent ourselves in that unprecedented year. And Clarissa is the most famous person on the block. And I think I saw her walking laptop one day. And I said, "What are you up to?"
Her dog. Her dog.
Yes, okay. So I said, "What are you up to?" And she said, "Oh, I'm going to the 1696 Thomas Massey House." And embarrassed to say, I said, "Where is that?" And she said, "Over there in Marple." And I said, "Okay, and what else?" And she said, "Well, I'm a volunteer there, and I maintain the 17th, 18th century kitchen garden." And I said, "It's a house?" And I love the architecture from colonial era. Absolutely love it. So that is what really attracted me, because I know you're all ALFAM and Foodways people, and I've learned so much about what you do, and I'm so grateful you do what you do. But it was the house, the idea of going to this colonial house. So I got an idea, and I'm not a filmmaker, but events that I had had at the library were recorded by a gentleman named Tom Ellis. So I said, "Clarissa, why don't we put on our masks one day, and I'll follow you. I'll meet you there." And I said, "We'll get Tom to film you." And Tom, everyone in this neighborhood knows Clarissa. And so I called Tom up and I said, "Tom, would you meet us at the 1696 Massey House?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because you know Clarissa Dillon." "Well, of course." And I said, "Well, she volunteers at the garden at the Massey House." And he said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, just film her." And he said, "Okay, we have to keep far apart, you know." And I said, "Well, I'm old too. Come on." So I had him meet us there, and we stayed far apart. And a lot of traffic on the road, so he just had a very nice camera, and it was a GoPro. So he had it on a pedestal, and I was actually in the background. Tom was filming Clarissa, and I was walking around taking pictures of this beautiful house, pictures of Clarissa too, because she was dressed in her period clothing. So then in the end, I had footage, no, Tom had footage, and then we weren't quite sure what to do with it. And Tom said, he called me up and he said, "This is important. Clarissa is important." He said, "But I can't be part of this project." Because I had asked him to come back again and again. It was so open-ended in that unprecedented year. So then I just suddenly, with my phone, became a filmmaker. And then I learned how to do it, did it on my phone. Luckily, those episodes couldn't be any longer than 10 minutes. We were grateful for that.
Yes,
And then I think it got
about how
better.
you became a filmmaker.
We've all had to reinvent ourselves,
Yes,
living
exactly.
online. Dan, living in a virtual world. You took
Yes.
all your events virtual. Everything came to. But I learned it was just wonderful being introduced to ALFAM because I just did not have an awareness of Alfam. And then I was staying up at night looking at the site, the beautiful website, the pictures that you have. And then I ended up looking at the Delaware Valley Historic Foodways. So Clarissa introduced me to everyone in your organization and what you do. And I find it fascinating. I'm grateful for what you do. And this is what we did.
Let me show you episode 20 right now.
Okay.
This is why the garden is not part of the video at the moment. Good morning, and here we are again for a late winter meal. It's finally possible to get here. We've had so much snow, rolling snowstorms. Every time you think you can come, it snows again. So it's been a while. Today we're having a late winter meal, and I based a lot of it on Elizabeth Drinker's diary. Elizabeth Drinker kept a diary for 49 years and wrote about all sorts of things, including food and menus. So we're going to have a cranberry pie today. She mentioned cranberries. We are also going to have chicken, and we're going to have parsnips. She doesn't talk about parsnips, but they were definitely a winter vegetable. I have grown them, but not here. And so I decided we would prepare them. So I'm making the pie crust right now. I mixed up the pie crust, and now I'm going to knead it a little, and then I'm going to beat it with the rolling pin. That's one of the reasons I like to make pie crust, because you get to work off any aggressions you have. There's a receipt that says beat with your rolling pin, and this is what I need. Then you can roll out your crust, and you don't have to spend as much time working on it with your fingers, which is not good because the warmth of your hands will affect the butter in the crust. This crust has flour, butter, an egg, and cold water. And it will be a bottom crust with a lattice top. The receipt is very Where's the sound?
You know, that could be Dan's recording, and
Oh.
this is a recording.
Oh,
And
okay.
that could be something built into Vimeo. Yeah, because he's recording it, and I'm not quite sure. But people will watch it and know that the production values are much better than this. Right? It's just recording a recording.
Mhm.
Still watch it. Yeah.
The parsnips are going to be scraped and sliced to remove the inner core, which is very woody. And then the parsnips will just be served with butter. If you were going to have them at another time of year, you might add some cream.
Okay. Yeah, it's not us. It's just it does.
You're muted, Dan.
Right.
That was great. Thank you very much. That was one
Yeah.
example of one cool colonial
Right.
that you guys can access. All you have to do is type one cool colonial.
Right.
And it will come up to the Radnor Library and that
Yeah.
episode. It's my understanding you guys are going to record another one this week, right?
Mhm. I think so. Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you, but I don't think, here we are presenting and we were filming or recording something that already exists as a recording. So I just want people to know that boy, the production values are much better. On my end, it didn't work out that well. But I don't know what everyone else saw, but the films are
I think
pretty good.
If you did it right directly from the website, it's a little better. So I do apologize.
Oh,
if
for
there's any
sure.
glitches.
Yeah, but thank you.
guys get the idea. So
Thanks, Dan.
thank you very much
Thank you.
for making Clarissa a video and YouTube star. I'm sure she's gonna be making a lot more money now from all our classes. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. Clarissa, you also have some booklets, some cook that you would like to talk about?
Oh, yes. My most recent production is this. This is an exuberant collection of culinary and medicinal syrups from the 17th and 18th century. And it is, goodness, suddenly there was a pink page right in the middle. It has all sorts of syrups which can be used for a variety of things. The book is $8 with $2 for postage. All you have to do is send me the money and your mailing address, and I will send you the book. I have another one called hors d'oeuvres, which is a real 18th century word. I did find it in a cookbook. And that's what started me on this collection, which is hors d'oeuvres or choice little dishes. And then another book which I did during the COVID period is entitled Which Came First, the Chicken or the Egg? And colonial cooks may have realized when they were trying to choose receipts, turkeys are too big, ducks are too expensive, geese can't be found. And so you end up with chicken for receipts that talk about fowl. So I collected a whole lot of receipts like that, and then talked about different things that you do with eggs. And I had a lot of fun with that. And then another one is sweet and savory sauces for a wide variety of dishes. And this was the outgrowth of an Alfam presentation entitled Only One Sauce, because some Frenchmen complained that the English had something like 47 different religions and only one sauce. I am now working on a book, You May Preserve Them Good, which will deal with jams, excuse me, marmalades and conserves. So the hors d'oeuvres book is 7, the sauces and is 7, and the chicken and the syrups are 8.
Okay.
And the whole list of all the books I've done is on my website.
I just sent over a copy to everybody, her website. If you're interested, please check that out. And again, if you're interested in a copy of her talk, send me a dan@historicfoodways.org, and I will be glad to send in everybody who would like a copy of her talk that includes her footnotes, as she said. Well, with that, I think that was a fantastic presentation. And I would like to just say good night to everybody. And again, our next program is on May 13th on Black Smoke, African American in the United States of Barbecue. I look forward to seeing everybody then. Until then, keep tasting history. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.
Night. Thank
Good
you.
night from
Thank
Canada.
Thank you.
Great talk, Clarissa.